When police and paramedics rushed to a stately North Carolina mansion on the night of December 9, 2001, they found a scene that would divide experts for decades. A woman lay motionless at the bottom of a narrow staircase, surrounded by an alarming amount of blood. Her husband stood nearby, barefoot and distraught, insisting she had fallen. Within hours, what seemed like a tragic accident would transform into one of the most controversial death investigations in modern American history. Kathleen Peterson was 48 years old and living what many would call a dream life. As a successful corporate executive for Nortel Networks, she was the primary breadwinner for her blended family. She and her husband Michael, a novelist and former mayoral candidate, lived in a 14-room mansion in Durham. Their home was filled with Christmas decorations that December evening, and neighbors knew them as a prominent, sophisticated couple. Michael told investigators he had been outside by the pool when he heard Kathleen fall. He claimed she must have slipped on the stairs while heading up to bed. The responding officers initially treated the scene as an accidental death. Falls downstairs claim thousands of lives each year in America, and at first glance, this appeared to be another tragic statistic. But Detective Art Holland felt something was wrong the moment he stepped inside. The sheer volume of blood coating the walls, floor, and victims seemed excessive for a simple fall. Dried blood patterns suggested significant time had passed before the 911 call was made. The scene was disturbing in its violence, yet Michael Peterson had been calm on the phone, even calling back to update the dispatcher that his wife was now dead. Within days, medical examiner Deborah Radish performed the autopsy that would change everything. Kathleen had sustained 7 deep lacerations to her scalp, along with numerous bruises and abrasions. Her thyroid cartilage was crushed, suggesting strangulation. Defensive wounds marked her arms and hands. Most telling were the injuries to her head. The lacerations showed a pattern inconsistent with striking a flat surface like stairs. Radish concluded these were inflicted by repeated blows from a light but rigid weapon. The manner of death was changed from accident to homicide. Prosecutors built their case around a missing fireplace tool called a blowpoke. This hollow metal implement, a gift from Kathleen's sister, had vanished from the Peterson home. The theory suggested Michael had beaten his wife with this weapon, then disposed of it. The motive emerged as investigators dug into the couple's private life. On Michael's computer, they discovered thousands of images of naked men and email exchanges with a male escort. The prosecution argued that Kathleen had discovered her husband's secret life that night, leading to a confrontation that turned deadly. There was also a $1.4 million life insurance policy to consider, but the defense team, led by attorney David Rudolph, challenged every assumption. They brought in their own expert, renowned forensic scientist Henry Lee, who examined the blood spatter evidence. Lee concluded the patterns were more consistent with an accidental fall than a beating. Using visual demonstrations with ketchup and whiteboards, he showed how a person falling and repeatedly trying to stand could create similar blood distribution. He couldn't completely rule out assault, but he testified that the scene looked more like an accident. Then the defense produced the supposedly missing blowpoke. Michael's son claimed he had found it in the garage, overlooked by investigators. Tests showed no blood, tissue, or hair. The murder weapon theory collapsed. Yet prosecutors countered that this might not even be the original blowpoke, suggesting the defense had planted evidence. The trial became a battle of competing scientific interpretations, with each side hiring experts who reached opposite conclusions from the same physical evidence. The case took an even stranger turn when prosecutors introduced another death from Michael Peterson's past. In 1985, Elizabeth Ratliff, a family friend, had been found dead at the bottom of her staircase in Germany. Peterson had been the last person to see her alive. Initially ruled a natural death from a brain hemorrhage, Ratliff's body was exhumed and re-examined. This time, pathologists determined she had died from blunt force trauma to the head. While not directly accusing Peterson of that murder, prosecutors used it to suggest he knew how to stage a death to look like an accident. The odds of one man being present for 2 women dying from falls downstairs seemed astronomically small. After one of the longest trials in North Carolina history, the jury convicted Michael Peterson of first-degree murder in October 2003. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The verdict seemed to close the case, but the story was far from over. A French documentary crew had been filming since shortly after Kathleen's death, creating an unprecedented look inside a murder defense. The series, called The Staircase, would introduce millions to the complexities of the case. Years later, revelations emerged that would shake the conviction. Duane Deaver, a prosecution blood spatter expert whose testimony had been crucial, was found to have misrepresented his qualifications and given misleading testimony. He had also conducted tests on Michael's clothing but never turned over the results to the defense. When these ethical violations came to light, Peterson was granted a new trial in 2011. After spending 8 years behind bars, he was released. Before the new trial could begin, another theory entered public consciousness. Attorney Lawrence Pollard, who lived near the Petersons, noticed microscopic feathers mentioned in the autopsy report. He consulted with ornithologists and proposed what became known as the owl theory. Pollard suggested that a barred owl had attacked Kathleen while she was outside, its talons creating the unusual lacerations on her scalp. Disoriented and bleeding, she stumbled inside and fell on the stairs, dying from her injuries. Several bird experts agreed the wounds were consistent with talon marks. The theory explained the fine cuts that seemed too delicate for blunt force trauma. The owl theory never made it into court, but it highlighted how different the physical evidence looked depending on the lens through which it was viewed. Was this a brutal murder by a desperate husband? An unfortunate accident involving a common household hazard? Or an attack by a wild animal followed by a fall? Each theory had experts willing to support it. Each had evidence that seemed to fit. In February 2017, facing the uncertainty of another trial, Michael Peterson entered what is known as an Alford plea. This unusual legal maneuver allowed him to maintain his innocence while acknowledging that prosecutors had enough evidence for a conviction. He pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to time already served. After 15 years of legal battles, he walked free. The Kathleen Peterson case reveals the profound challenges of death investigation when initial appearances can be deceiving. Investigators who treat a scene as an accident may contaminate or lose evidence that would prove homicide. But those who assume murder too quickly might pursue the wrong suspect while the true explanation goes unexplored. The case also exposed how medical examiners in different jurisdictions can reach completely different conclusions from similar evidence. 2 women died at the bottom of staircases, yet depending on which county performed the autopsy, the ruling could swing from natural causes to homicide. What made investigators initially believe Kathleen Peterson's death was an accident? The scenario fit a common pattern. Stairs are dangerous, especially for someone who might have been drinking. Michael Peterson appeared cooperative and grief-stricken. There was no obvious murder weapon at the scene, but the excessive blood, the pattern of injuries, the time inconsistencies, and the husband's suspiciously clean appearance despite the carnage around him raised too many questions. What seemed obvious in the first minutes became increasingly murky with each hour of investigation. The truth may never be fully known. Michael Peterson maintains his innocence to this day. Kathleen's daughter from a previous marriage, who initially supported Michael, eventually became convinced of his guilt and settled a wrongful death lawsuit against him for $25 million. The jury that convicted him believed the prosecution's narrative. The judge who granted a new trial believed the scientific testimony had been fundamentally flawed. Experts who examined the same evidence reached completely opposite conclusions. This case stands as a reminder that death investigations exist in the space between medicine, science, and law. Each discipline has its own methods, its own standards of proof, and its own potential for error. When they align, justice becomes clearer. When they conflict, as they did in this case, the result is not clarity, but rather a disturbing uncertainty that haunts everyone involved. An accident or a murder? After 2 decades, millions of dollars in legal fees, countless expert testimonies, and international media attention. That question remains as contested as it was on that December night when first responders entered a blood-soaked staircase and tried to determine what they were really looking at.